You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are chatting with Jon Kimura Parker, international soloist, chamber musician, and pedagogue. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Parker is in town to perform the Tchaikovsky First Piano Concerto this weekend with the Bellingham Symphony. It's such an iconic piece. Could you tell us a little bit about your early experience with it and how it's grown through your career?
Well, the Tchaikovsky is a concerto I always wanted to learn. Of course, if I say the Tchaikovsky, we are talking about number one. I mean, he wrote other works for piano and orchestra. They just never received the same amount of popular acclaim as his first concerto, for good reason. I think the first is just a masterpiece. But I've always wanted to play it, and I finally had an opportunity to learn it in my 20s. And I was invited to play it with the Hagerstown, Maryland Symphony Orchestra, a nice, small, out-of-the-way place, except that the music director was the great French horn virtuoso Barry Tuckwell.
Wow.
And he was really into conducting, and he somehow, this orchestra became his orchestra, and he was sort of cutting his teeth on all this orchestral repertoire. And so it was an amazing opportunity to work with one of the world's great iconic musicians. I mean, I had grown up listening to Barry Tuckwell's recordings of the horn concertos and other repertoire, and I just really held him in the highest esteem. So I was sort of nervous to be anywhere near him, you know. But and it was a fabulous experience, and especially so because the very beginning of the piece starts with the horns, and they were terrified to play for him.
Of course.
but they knew that he'd be very sympathetic, and it was great. But I have to say, the funniest thing happened. I was, and this, my experience with so many British musicians, this is not a completely off-the-wall story, that right before the performance, I knocked on Maestro Tuckwell's dressing room door, and I shook his hand. I said, "I'm really looking forward to the performance." And he handed me a glass of scotch and says, "Here, this will be good for your rubato."
Fabulous.
And I was thinking, I don't know about that. I'm not sure. Maybe be good for the rubato, not so good for the octave passages. But I finally, peer pressure, had the tiniest sip. But I mean, that's just not something I would do before a concert.
No, certainly not.
But brass players will absolutely say, and I've heard certainly in London brass players say this. He says, "Well, it keeps the lip moist and takes a little edge off the nerves, and we get a better sound this way." So if it works,
if it works, do it.
Yeah, and since then I've played the Tchaikovsky in so many different cities and surroundings, and I mean, I've played it with the NHK Orchestra in Tokyo, and it's just as popular in Japan as it is anywhere else. I played it once with the Orchestra of St. Luke's with Roger Norrington conducting in Carnegie Hall. And that was fascinating because Sir Roger had a lot of kind of early music ideas that he felt, including, faster tempos and a lot more feeling the beats, things that he felt translated absolutely not just in early classical and Baroque music, but all the way through Berlioz and Tchaikovsky and others. And so that was interesting. Absolutely. And then I had this great experience quite early on, actually, when I was about 25, of recording the Tchaikovsky Concerto for Telarc with Andre Previn.
Wow.
And, that was unbelievably exciting. I remember meeting Maestro Previn, and he says, "Call me Andre." And he says, "I understand this is your first recording." And I said, "Yes, it is." And I knew not to say, "This isn't your first, is it?" But I mean, it was like his 200th or something, But Andre Previn was a consummate professional. He got quite ill that week, and he actually had to cancel the concert that we were meant to play. And so we ended up having no rehearsal or concert, and then suddenly we had a recording session. So my very first experience in a recording studio was having Telarc say, we're rolling, and having Andre look at me and says, "Would you sing the tempo for me?" Wow. Yeah, and then we started recording. And I was so nervous. I sang the tempo, I think, ever so slightly slower than I really intended it because I wasn't used to singing it.
Right.
But that's what happened. And the teller guy says, "Look, we don't have that much time. We've got a few hours. We really should get going." And we just started recording with
That's incredible.
yeah, no rehearsal, no concert, nothing, zero prep, and and that was my sort of entry into the world of professional recording, which is I've always felt. I much prefer performing live.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I play this piece, I feel like there's an electricity about it, and people get so drawn in to the power of the music, and the idea that the piano and the orchestra are working in a complementary fashion, but also it's sometimes actually is piano versus orchestra too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's whole passages where it's one
Yeah.
or the other. I love to talk about the electricity. It's one of my favorite subjects. I think that's one of the most powerful things about music and live music particularly. Could you talk about maybe a couple experiences that you had where you found it to be particularly profound for you?
Every time I play, I realize that the circumstance is different from every other time that I play.
Mm-hmm.
The people are different, the hall is different, my colleagues on stage are different. But even if I'm touring with an orchestra and we're playing from city to city, the halls change, the people change, the acoustics change, atmosphere feels different. Some halls have an sort of just ingrained sense of atmosphere about them, which can be kind of exciting. And of course, if you play in a place like Carnegie Hall, you just think of the history of everyone who's been on the stage of Carnegie Hall, and it just gives you shivers.
Absolutely.
Like the first time I played there was Prokofiev Third Piano Concerto with Stanislav Skrbachevsky and the Halle Orchestra from Manchester, and I walked on stage and I felt confident about Prokofiev Third. That was I had also recorded with Previn, and that one we actually had rehearsed. But I felt confident about the piece. I knew that I knew it, but I walked on stage of Carnegie Hall and I realized my heart was beating so fast I thought I was going to explode. And that's just Carnegie Hall.
Yeah.
I was born in Vancouver, Canada, and we happen to have a very beautiful theater there, the Orpheum. I perform there often. Every time I play there, I feel a certain kind of buzz in the air because it's my hometown, and I know that I have a lot of friends in the audience. But the one time that would be the most special concert I ever played, by far, I mean, this was truly exceptional, was I was invited by a representative from a company called Americares to accompany an airlift to Bosnia, and this was in 1995. At the Dayton Peace Treaty had just been signed. A ceasefire had taken place in, I think, early December of 1995, but it was fragile, the peace in the region, and Americares had gone 35 times during the war delivering food, medicine, and clothing to people there. And they announced that they were going to do their 36th airlift to celebrate the peace. And the airlift was scheduled for New Year's Eve, which was, I think, symbolic of new beginnings. And after they made this announcement, the Sarajevo Philharmonic, which had not been able to perform for years, announced that they were going to give a concert on New Year's Eve. Bono from U2 was in Sarajevo that night. I met him very briefly, and he was announcing that U2 was going to come and perform. And so there I was with the Sarajevo Philharmonic. I had agreed to be airlifted in on this trip as the soloist and to play the Beethoven Emperor Piano Concerto. And I mean, first of all, Sarajevo Philharmonic had not played together for years. Anybody who goes to the symphony knows that string players all share music stands. And there were Serbs and Croats and all variety of people from that region sharing music stands, happy to make music together, who had no bone to pick with each other while politically around them this war had been happening. And we played the Emperor Piano Concerto with that incredibly beautiful slow movement. And during the performance, I felt for the whole performance that this was something very unusual, that the music wasn't a normal concert, but that this was a celebration. This was a concert filled with hope that things really would change and would stay positive. We were playing in a concert hall that was not destroyed, but it was very badly damaged in the war, and there were bits and pieces taken out of it, and the heating wasn't working. It was cold. I mean, the whole atmosphere of it was very special. I remember in the rehearsal, the violinists were wearing these sort of mittens with the finger parts cut off, right. So they could keep their hands warm but still play. And I mean, it was something to see. After the concert, a very old Bosnian woman came backstage. She found our translator, and who then found me, and she said she just wanted me to know that during the slow movement of the Beethoven, for a couple of minutes, she realized that she had finally stopped thinking about the war.
Wow. Incredible.
Yeah, and I just, I thought that's what music is for. That's what music's about. That's every concert I've ever played, it was about that moment.
Absolutely. And it's so special when you can reach somebody and they feel the feelings that they're supposed to from your music. How do you go about your preparation for a concerto or recitals with those kinds of thoughts in mind? How do you get yourself into the zone?
I've never had any problem getting excited about walking on stage. And of course, sometimes I'm nervous, sometimes I'm just excited, sometimes, I've had to push mundane things like, dealing with emails and things out of my head at a certain time. But I never have a problem. Once I walk on stage, I feel like that's a special moment, and it's special for people who are in the audience. I've been to a lot of concerts, of course, and I've sat down. And just as the concert was starting, I've had any number of things going through my head, which can include, I haven't quite finished dealing with the day yet. I better send one more text,
Yeah.
and I'm waiting for the music to take me to another place, which is what I think a live performance can do. And I think musical recordings can do that too, but for me, a live performance is... it's like the difference between watching a movie on streaming a movie or actually watching it in a theater. Because I feel like in a theater, you have committed your attention to that, and it's the same with a live concert. You've committed your attention for a period of time, and the experience exists over a period of time, and it takes on a kind of a life of its own. So for me, I have no problem getting into that zone. I just love being there. A typical preparation, well, there is no typical preparation day, actually. I mean, some days I'm traveling half the day within hours of giving a concert, especially if I'm on an orchestra tour or something. And other times I show up several days early. I have a chance to get sort of acclimatized. Maybe I have to get over jet lag or something. And I've found all my favorite restaurants in town within a day.
You know where to go.
I know where to go. And I try on a concert day to have some time in the afternoon where I just shut everything out of my mind and go blank. Sometimes that means I take a nap. Sometimes it just means I kind of meditate. But just some way of emptying out. And then I feel that I can go to a concert and get myself physically prepared, but that's my mental preparation, and then I'm ready.
What about when you are revisiting a piece, either that you've played a million times or that you haven't played in a while? Is there any ideas that you have how to go back to something with a fresh energy?
It can be very difficult. I remember the first time that I had not played the Brahms second piano concerto in 7 years. That seemed like an enormously long time. And I remember coming back to it, and I was nervous about how long it would take. And I realized that the hardest parts came back fairly quickly because I had put so much work into them the first time around. And I actually consciously slowed down the process of bringing the music back because I wanted to experience it with new ears, and different fingers, and so some works come back very quickly. The works that I learned in my teens and 20s tend to come back very, very fast, and the works that I learned later come back slower and slower. And it's something I learned and memorized for the first time a couple of years ago will commensurately take much more time to bring back after a couple of years have gone by. So the things that I learned when I was very young, and I tell my students this. I have a piano class at the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University, and they're all incredibly strong players in my class. And I tell them, I said, look, it's an incredibly important investment now to learn the most difficult pieces that you have any remote idea that you might want to play one day. Learn them now while you're young and your brain is just soaking everything in and you're agile, your fingers don't hurt, like they do when you're older. And,
Right.
I mean,
That's great advice.
Yeah, just get that in your system now. And some of the brighter ones actually take my advice, and they just learn one difficult thing after another, because the hard things that I learned early on,
they're there.
They're kind of hardwired into my system.
Yeah. The youthful brain is amazing. What kinds of things do you talk about with your students now in today's musical economy, and how to get out there and the different choices that there are and how different it was from when you got started? What kinds of things do you guys discuss?
Well, everything stems, I think, from meaning, musical meaning. And for me, communication. Mm-hmm. Communication is not every artist's priority. I think some artists, their artistic statement is the only thing that they want to think about, and the idea of communicating, it's sort of secondary. But my idols as pianists, I mean, my three piano idols instantly that come to mind are Arthur Rubinstein, who communicated incredible joy when he played. It was always satisfying to listen to his playing, and always touching and always personal. Oscar Peterson, who is maybe the greatest piano technician I've ever heard, and I heard him live many times, and the incredible joy with which he would put together a jazz trio or play solo or whatever it was. I mean, it was just totally electrifying, and so engaging. He was so into it, and I always have wanted to be that into it.
Yeah.
And my third idol, as far as pianists go, is Elton John,
Yeah.
and it's the same reason. Just joy of performing. I took my family to hear Elton John in, I don't know how many times he's done a farewell tour, but it was a couple of months ago in Houston, and it was brilliant. It was fantastic, and just the same joy. His voice doesn't go quite as high. He's obviously not as acrobatic on stage anymore. Doesn't matter. I mean, the music and the communication, and it's all still great. So I talk to my students a lot about the value of communication. And I actually train them a little bit in public speaking and require them to do a fair amount of it, which they're always surprised to think would be remotely important, Yeah. But mostly what we talk about is what is your personality and how does your personality intersect with this piece of music? How does it make you feel? How do you want other people to feel when you play it? And because that's a very different question if you're playing a Chopin nocturne or playing a Beethoven sonata,
right.
Or playing a big piano concerto. So that's very much at the essence. And then, of course, surrounding all of that is, why don't you try this fingering here? And, if your right hand takes that note, then your left hand can do this voice here. And there's all the practical stuff, and it's just like an endless rabbit hole of stuff, But pianists and many musicians can, with the best of intentions, completely miss the forest for the trees, right? And there's so much detail that is required to play the piano well, to play the violin well, to play any instrument well. It's just an enormous amount of detail. And then you can forget, well, all those details are really important, but that's not actually what moves people when they're sitting there in the hall. Right. I think a lot about my parents when I perform, and they had very different influences on me. My mother, who's Japanese, was a piano teacher, and where I was growing up in Vancouver, Canada, and my uncle, Edward Parker, was my regular piano teacher, and my mom, Keiko Parker, was the other 6 days a week piano supervisor. And very good at it, and very, she never let me get away with a single error.
Your mom.
I mean, she was just total perfectionist. So, that was huge for me.
Yeah.
Then my father, John Parker, was never had any musical training, but was emotionally so wrapped up in classical music, especially piano music. And he always referred to a piece of music as being exciting or nostalgic or tragic, or, there would be all those kinds of words associated with a performance. And he, along the way, developed an incredible knowledge of pianists without ever having had a single piano lesson. His brother, Edward, who was my teacher, had all the lessons. My father, there was one time the radio was on. I was about 11 or so, and there was a piano concerto on, and I had no idea what it was. I just could tell there was a piano in an orchestra. And my father, after about 3 seconds, my father says, "Well, this is the Brahms first piano concerto, and maybe you'll play it one day." And I thought, well, it sounds too hard to me. And so, kept going. And then after another couple of minutes, my father says, "And this is the Emil Gilels recording of the Brahms
That's awesome.
yeah, first piano concerto." And I said, "How could you possibly know that?" And he says, "I know how he plays it." And, we listened to the end until the CBC announcer came on and says, Emil Gilels playing the Brahms first piano concerto. And, I never forgot that story, but then the nice coda to that story is that years later, I did play the Brahms first concerto with the Vancouver Symphony, and my parents could come to the concert. And that meant the world to me, yeah.
But what an incredible ear he had to really be able to decipher all of those small details that create your playing style.
Exactly. And I think that's, for anyone who's nervous about going to a concert and, I don't know anything about music and I don't know when to clap. And I said, it doesn't matter. Show up in a T-shirt and jeans and clap when other people do, and just listen and enjoy it. It's such an amazing experience, and you might suddenly discover a new passion.
Absolutely. What was it like studying with a family member?
Well, it was interesting studying with Uncle Edward because my parents had given him carte blanche to be as tough as he wanted to be, and he could be really, really tough. So I was really strongly encouraged to make good use of my talent and work very, very hard. Mm-hmm. And I mean, one great Edward Parker story, I would have been about, 13 or something. There were all these music festivals, which had little piano competitions associated with them when I was growing up in Vancouver, and I was playing in the Kiwanis Festival in the Bach category, and you were supposed to play a Bach two-part invention, and so it was an age limit, and I was right at the age limit, and so I was competing against all these other kids my age. Except my uncle thought it would be impressive if I learned a three-part invention because they're harder. So I learned a three-part invention. We worked on it, over several weeks or months or whatever. And then some other parent got wind of the fact that I was playing a three-part invention, and the guideline for the class and for the competition was two-part invention. And so the mom moved to have me disqualified. And this was, a good defensive move because I was talented when I was a kid and I used to win all these things all the time. So we heard about this the day before, that I was going to be disqualified because I had prepared a three-part invention. So my uncle had me come over to his house where he gave lessons, and he assigned me a two-part invention that I was to learn and memorize that night. And I basically stayed in his house. I mean, there were like 11 pianos in his house. So I was in a room with an upright piano, and I worked on this one invention all night. And he would periodically take a break from teaching his other students, and he'd come over and give me like a little 5-minute guideline lesson on something, and then he'd disappear for a few hours and come back. And I memorized it overnight.
My gosh.
And played it in the I haven't thought about this story in years and years, and went and played, and I won the class anyway. So the mom who tried to get me disqualified, it totally backfired.
Wow.
So anyway,
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so that was the kind of, my uncle, he would just force me to work hard, and it paid off.
And he knew you could do it. And
Yeah.
how cool to have somebody who knows you well enough to push you to get you to do it. And you won anyway. So can you still play that piece? I bet you've got it right there.
I used to be able to whistle and hum both parts. It was a party trick of mine. It's all gone now.
That's incredible. I would love to take a second to chat about all these other hats that you have. You are kind of co-artistic director with your wife at Orcas Island Chamber Music Festival.
Well, I'm the artistic advisor.
Advisor.
Aloysia Friedman, my wife, founded the Orcas Island Chamber Music Festival 22 years ago. She founded the festival in 1998. We had our first festival, which was a weekend of concerts, and then we got married the next day.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was
story.
great. So we had lots of fun music at our wedding because we had all these wonderful musicians on the island. And this was on Orcas Island, which is, of course, very close to where we are now in Bellingham.
Yeah.
And, I can see it out the window,
Yeah.
And my title of artistic advisor essentially is a very sophisticated way of saying that I'm the house pianist. So I play the majority of the concerts, and it's so much fun. I mean, the number of artists that Aloysia has brought to this part of the country and that we've worked with, it's just been staggering.
Absolutely.
So much fun.
It's an incredible festival.
Yeah.
So, and how many weeks is it every summer?
It's basically 3 consecutive weekends in August. With actually most of the days in between. I mean, we play something like 15 concerts in 20 days or something, because we have one day called the Hamlet Concerts Day, where we basically, like a traveling band of musicians, we travel around the island and play free concerts in community halls around the island.
How cool.
And most of our concerts take place at Orcas Center. We occasionally do an outdoor concert, and so all sorts of different things.
Just have a blast.
Yeah.
And then I saw you just got announced to be the artistic partner for Minnesota Orchestra Summer Festival.
We just announced this very recently, it's the summer festival component of what the Minnesota Orchestra does, and I have a 3-year appointment as creative partner with the orchestra. This is a really different direction for them because typically an orchestra's summer director is a conductor,
right?
Which makes a lot of sense. But I've been working with the Minnesota Orchestra in some collaborative capacity or another as concerto soloist, as touring soloist, as chamber musician with the players for about 30 years. So it seemed the players really wanted to see if there was a way that I could be involved. And so I'm looking forward to this.
It's super exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And it's a very different kind of thing from anything I've done before, and invigorating in a lot of ways.
And so are you going to be helping curate and
yes,
basically
exactly.
plan the programs?
I'll be helping to plan the programs. We have a theme organized now for next summer, and we just have to sort of fill in all the blanks and get it sorted out before we can announce it. But that's very exciting. And I pretty much know what we're going to do for the summer of 2021, and so we're thinking ahead and being organized about that. And the whole idea of creative partner is that I'm not dictating things.
Right.
I have ideas and we talk them through, and there's a committee that involves administration and orchestra players, which is a really nice setup. And we talk through things and organize them that way. I do have a position where I am the artistic director, which is relatively new concept for me, which is of the Honans International Piano Competition and Festival in Calgary, Alberta. And that's very exciting for me because I also have an association with Honans going back to being on the very first jury in 1992. Honans is one of the world's biggest piano competitions. We give a very significant first prize. We go to great efforts to promote the career of the winner for a 3-year period. And our most recent winner, Nicholas Namorada, is astounding. I mean, he's an incredible pianist. In the competition, he played etudes that he wrote himself, which are somehow he plays. You realize when you hear it, well, I'll never be able to play that.
Oh my gosh!
I mean, they're really very, very special. And And then on the off years, to keep interest going in the Honens, everything that's happening, is we have a Honens festival. And we just had one last month, and it was great. We had a lot of different pianists performing in Calgary over a 4-day period. We celebrated Alexina Louis, one of our great composers in Canada. And we had Gabriel Kahane performing a late night set of his own compositions. Yeah, it was great. Cool. It was really, really fun.
That's awesome. So this is a perfect lead in. I find that musicians, the more they fall in love with their career and the more they get involved in the trajectory, the more and more and more they take on, and the amount of things that get done in 1 year is just incredible. So how do you, A, plan out your year, and B, actually have the energy to do the 900 things that you just named?
Well, yeah, coffee's involved. Yeah, I don't know, actually.
And do you ever crash, or does it just
I kind of rarely have a day off, and I probably should have a few more days off. What's been happening, for example, this after having had a very busy summer, the fall I have performed in at least 1 or 2 different cities each weekend, like every weekend, and it's going to continue that way for most of the fall. And that means that to teach my class at Rice, which I typically do Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, I then travel a lot on Thursdays, perform on a weekend, and fly home on a Sunday night or a Monday. And so that just doesn't really allow for time off. I mean, I kind of consider sitting on the airplane time off, because I do that a lot, and I usually shut down and watch videos or something. I mean, I can't work on an airplane. I'm just like, at that point, I've just had it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, being a musician, and I focus a lot on collaborative playing. Like I play a lot of chamber music. I have a trio, the Montrose Trio, and we just played 2 concerts last weekend, and we're very active as a trio. I have a part-time quintet with the rock drummer Stuart Copeland called Off the Score, and that's really interesting and different. And our schedules are so mutually incompatible that we actually rarely perform, as it turns out. But when we can, we do. But I still think of myself in terms of solo playing, like concerto playing, and to some extent chamber music playing, basically as a freelance artist, right? I mean, you never know how busy next season's going to be. And if it turns out to be too busy, that's generally better than the alternative.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, because of being a musician and loving to collaborate, I'm constantly invigorated and surrounded by interesting people. Yeah. I mean, music is, the pursuit of music involves so many things. It's the pursuit of technical perfection, which you will never, ever reach. I mean, I've met a couple of pianists like Marc-André Amelan. Yeah, I would actually say he's reached technical perfection, but, most of us mere mortals, we get as close as we can. And there's the whole idea of musicianship and artistry and meaning, and what do you want to say with the music you're playing. But if you're collaborating, then that becomes a joint effort. And that's really, really exciting. And so much fun. And, we always trade off of each other and learn from each other, whether I'm working with a conductor or my colleagues in the Montrose Trio or Chamber Music Festival on Orcas, just working with all different people. And it's just so invigorating. That I think that's the key to what keeps me going.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much. We're so grateful to have gotten to talk to you today.
Thank you very much, Erica.
Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Check out InsideTheNotes.com for videos and more information on our guests. Follow Inside the Notes podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to receive more information on our next guests.